No, because
Um,
they won't take it seriously. They're just gonna be talking shit. It'd be great for them, like,
Yeah,
but will
yeah,
I? Do
fair.
you want me to text them and just be like, tune in?
yeah, tell them. Yeah.
Yeah, go
Um,
on. Sure, we might as
yeah,
well.
I'm gonna go with we will hit like 10 to 12 people. Um, no, I'd say 8. I'll go with 8. Um,
Fair.
how many do you go with?
I'm gonna go a bit
How many
higher.
do you go with?
I'm gonna go like 18 to 20.
Really?
But like you hit 35 the last day.
Oh yeah?
I think so.
Fuck.
Come on.
Yeah, but that's 35 people who aren't coming back to this one.
It's fair. It's very fair.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
I'd say we'd be like, yeah, I'd say like 10 or 12.
Yeah. Yeah, there's got to be at least that many people who want to A, laugh with us again, and B, don't have anything better to do at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
But yeah, we actually forgot to make a name for this as well.
The channel thing.
Yeah, just what's it called? Because I called it the Jack, Alex, and Steven show the last day, and it's the same thing again now, I think.
Yeah, I was like, you could use it again if you want.
Yeah. We get Jack Kenny on next time, and it'll be a trifecta.
Just keep getting different Jacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. We better tell them that Paddy Garvey is unfortunately saving the world and can't make it today.
Yeah, he's the Headford version of Joe Exotic, saving his calves out on the farm. But,
yeah.
Sure, he'll be able to join us doing damage at another time. Sure, there's
He will.
something else we have to talk about.
He is going taking the reins next week, he said.
Nice. We didn't have one of these planned for next week, but he can. I'll give him the Zoom. I'll give him the password for it. Let him go.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, that'll be pretty solid. But yeah. So, but 3 out of 4 ain't bad.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Would we leave it maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get started, and then we go?
Who is coming anyway? It is fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Potheads, we're up at 5, so that's already getting close to the 8 that I had guessed.
We're up at what?
So we're up at 5 people.
We're live. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been live for like 4 minutes now. We've been live for 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, so that's already a lot of people who are backing the brand, considering what happened on Monday.
Go on to lads.
You want to give a formal apology?
I'd like to apologise to absolutely fucking nobody. The coup is in again. What is up, brother?
Won the coup.
Class. So we wait till maybe 5 past and get it started.
Yeah.
Grand.
Yeah, we go for that.
Niall Curtin is in.
Go on, Niall Curtin. You're up.
Yeah, Niall, I actually only realised the last day that you asked us a question about arching on bench, and I just hung up the call and didn't answer it. So we'll actually be getting around to talking about that later on. So we'll go through that, because the one question we got asked, I actually just fucking ignored it at the end of the last one. So yeah, get around to that in a while.
Yurt.
And Manny is in as well. So Jesus, lads, this is like a regular Thursday in CityGym, isn't it?
And yeah. It's like we never left.
Fact.
Yeah, it's like we never went anywhere. You all get to listen to me make big unfounded claims for an hour, give out about things. Yeah, it's a normal day. But yeah, I think we'll Yeah, we could probably start talking about something now, can we? Oh, it's hit 8. There's 8 people.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like,
Nailed it. Yeah, start now.
Yeah, we can go whenever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the point of today's episode of whatever this is we're doing a research breakdown around the topic of detraining. So, Jack is a fourth year sports science student. So, basically, Jack's done a breakdown of the research that he's read in the last week or so around the topic. We're just going to be talking about that. I suppose before that, just want to sort of catch up on how you were and how your training's been going.
Yeah, no, obviously I'm not training kind of full out at the moment because I have 3 weeks left in my college course. So I'm literally training on my breaks. So training's kind of gone from being mad for making progress to kind of just getting away from the laptop for an hour or two, and even just getting out of the house. So I suppose I'm quite different to you two anyway, that I only have quite limited equipment. Thankfully, about a week before we went into lockdown, I just spotted a pair of 45 kilo dumbbells literally on a Facebook buy and sell, and they were brand new. And I was kind of at the time being like, geez, I don't know if this is a mad buy or what it is, but I decided I was going to buy them, and it was the best thing I could have bought for the moment anyway. They're doing me really, really well. So between that, thank you, Paddy Garvey. You sourced me a bench. He gave me a bench and an Olympic bar. I still haven't gotten any plates for the Olympic bar, but I got that off Paddy, and then I got what people are calling an Argos bar, a 1 inch barbell. Got one of them, and I actually have about 110 kilos of plates, even though it looks a bit mad. So to be fair, on the law of averages, I think I'm actually quite lucky in the equipment I've gotten. But so I suppose I might be a small bit different to everyone else, because I kind of came in carrying a bit of a back injury. So I probably wasn't going to hit any PBs in the foreseeable, the next 2 or 3 months anyway. So maybe it was a small bit easier for me to adjust. And to be honest, it could be a bit of a blessing in disguise, because when I came into this, I had an unbelievable amount of niggles. My back was constantly at me every session, and every session I'm doing now, it's just getting better and better. Fair enough, I'm not managing huge loads, but it's still going quite well. So just an example of the exercises I'm kind of doing is kind of obviously RDLs with the 45 kilo dumbbells. The only problem I'm having with that is I've no strap at the moment, and my grip is given out before my hamstrings do, which is a pain. But they're absolutely killing me. The long range of motion on them is doing me really well. I'm doing obviously loads of bench press. Starting now, I'm up to kind of maybe sets of 12-ish with the 45s, doing pause reps. I'm doing kind of these mad deficit deadlifts with these plates. It's literally a 3-inch deficit with the bar that I have. Kind of doing that for tempos, and then just kind of improvising with stuff as well. I don't know if any of you saw, I was doing chin-ups off the rafters. So I'm doing chin-ups off the rafters. I've started putting weight in the backpack and doing chin-ups off the rafters. I'm putting weights in a backpack and doing loads of push-ups, doing sets of 12. I put 20 kilos in the backpack the last day and did sets of 12 on push-ups. It was really, really good. Doing split squats with the same, putting weight in the backpack, holding some dumbbells. I think I was up to 40 kilo Bulgarian split squats the last day. Really, really good quad pump. And that just like that as well, kind of teasing out a small few weaknesses that I've had. Thoracic extension is definitely a weakness, trying to work on that, trying to work on trunk stability, definitely lower back strength, hamstring strength, quad or glute strength. And one thing I've just literally found out in this was that I think my quads are really, really weak when I'm in extreme flexion, because I've really poor dorsiflexion. So one thing I've actually brought in, which is I'm doing Nordic curls and reverse Nordic curls. And I know for some people, reverse Nordic curls can be quite harsh on the knees, and it actually was for me until I started doing them. So the first session I did, they were actually really sore on my knees, but I've kind of done 4 or 5 sessions now, and my knees feel 100 times better. So that's not scientific or anything, but that's exactly how it's worked for me. It's just the best my knees have felt in a while. And to be honest, I'm quite happy with how training's going. It's grand. At the moment, it's just kind of a bit of a stress relief. Nice to get a bit of a sweat on. That's kind of what I'm using it as. And hopefully we'll get a bit of gain a bit of muscle, maybe get a bit of strength in some areas.
100%.
That's kind of the goal.
100%. Because like even remember me and you were talking yesterday. We were saying that like even compared to like other people, you've a lot more time to be spending on doing other things, and you've a lot less equipment than other people, but you're still getting like savage sessions in as well. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're still
Well, like I'm trying to train kind of anywhere between 4 and 6 days. Like the sessions definitely aren't as long, because I'm not taking as big a rest periods and stuff. So maybe training for somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half, somewhere between 4 and 6 times a week. So kind of going pretty much an upper lower split. Is kind of what I'm doing with some alternate. Kind of nearly do chin-ups every day. Might do some sort of hip hinge every day, even if it gets really light, just because I felt I was quite weak on it. But yeah, that's pretty much as far as my training is going at the moment. Yeah, as I say, I'm quite happy with how it is, to be honest.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because particularly, I suppose with you coming into like this period of time or lockdown, carrying a few injuries, like you were saying, like you were getting a lot of back irritation, on a lot of your competition movements, was limiting what you were doing in the gym. But it may have been a blessing in disguise, because one thing that this has probably forced you to do is become much more resourceful. You know, you've basically had to build up your tolerance to training, and build your work capacity with like basically regressions of the compound movements, changing through equipment limitations towards easier to manage movements that aren't as complex and don't require don't have the same whole body demand, like your RDLs and your dumbbell work. So it's probably forced you to train in a way, even doing like upper lower splits and having more frequency. It's probably forced you to train in a way that's going to build your work capacity over time, which is what you would have needed to do anyway. And that's one thing I'm interested to see after all this dies down is, are people going to sort of analyze how they've adapted their training over this period of time and see how resourceful you actually can be, and not just be stuck to like, you know, the dogmatic ideas or the stereotypes or the sort of those preconceived notions of what you have to be doing in training, and seeing that there's so many other ways of doing it, you know? Or are we just gonna, after all this is done, go, nope, fuck that bullshit and go back to regular training? Hopefully it's somewhere in the middle.
For me anyway, I think it's like it's actually forced me to kind of check my ego a small bit. Like even when I was doing rehab work, even what I was thinking what was light probably wasn't light enough. You know, because like I've been training for not powerlifting, but just weight training for 6-7 years. There is still something in my head that when I was going into a gym, I didn't want to be handling weights I was handling 4 and 5 years ago. But this has literally made me. You know, that's just the you know, that's just the way it is at the moment. That it's kind of made me regress and build right from the bottom again, and build really good movement quality again in them patterns where I needed to.
Because like we always talk about how progress isn't a straight line, and that's very easy to say when you're in the gym and you're able to push something regardless, you know. You know, and you're still able to start pushing really good numbers and things you're happy with and things your ego's okay with. But when you're sort of forced to eat a shit sandwich and go back on numbers and like compare things and go, right, I was doing this fucking 3 or 4 years ago and I'm still doing this now. But you're not putting into context of, before this was probably a working set for you on a really good day, and now this is what you're doing in rehab from an injury, or that was your top set one week and now this is like your light recovery work a couple of years going forward. It's not you, like, we don't all just shoot straight up into the sun, you know. It doesn't, we don't just progress to infinite weight, you know. There has to be those up and down periods of it, and for a lot of people this is just going to be one of those periods where things are down, you know.
But it's like
accept that, the more,
as I was saying, like I had nearly already accepted that. I think that's probably what people are feeling getting a small bit, you know, caught up on that. Like I had kind of already accepted that I won't hit a 1 rep max, I won't hit a 3 rep max for probably somewhere between 3 to 6 months. And for a lot of people at home who don't have a full gym setup, that's probably going to be the reality for them as well. And I think just coming to terms with that, like it like that's fine, you know. Like it's not that like very few people outside yourself care about that. It's just putting yourself in the best position that you can be once the gyms reopen. I suppose not jumping straight back into maximal stuff and really slowly building your work capacity again, because the last thing you want to do is get injured when we can go back to full powerlifting training. That is like nearly worst case scenario.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, if you were to make a Venn diagram of all the things that could suck right now, being injured and being in lockdown would definitely be like the middle intersect of like what sucks for powerlifters. So trying to push yourself too hard right now is just not a good idea. Yeah, you probably have more resources to commit to training, but you also have to pull your ego back and pull back that novelty seeking part of yourself that wants to push for those, you know.
Well,
even if you're
I think that's... Sorry, go on. I was just going to say, if there's ever a time to put together back-to-back, like really consistent blocks, small jumps, keep movement quality, it's now, because like we don't know when the next competition is going to be. Like, you don't even know when the next time is going to be in the gym. You don't have to, like, no one has to see your training. You don't have to post your training for at least the next, like, I'm thinking 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Like, that's probably being really conservative. So like now is, if you want to get back-to-back blocks, but in focus on your movement quality, focus on slow progressions. It's kind of where it's at the moment.
Yeah, because I think using right now as an opportunity to focus on all that more boring stuff will allow you to push training much harder on the other side when you get back into the gym. Whereas if you forsake it right now, you're still going to have to work on it at some stage. It's just going to be sort of at a time where you probably couldn't have been pushing a bit harder if you had done the more diligent work right now. And as you sort of said, we don't know when the next comp's going to be. We don't know when we'll be back in the gym next. You know, as a competitive powerlifter, what you do right now doesn't matter at all. You're basically just setting yourself up for, like, at some stage you're going to have the best meet of your life. You're trying to set yourself up for that day. So it doesn't matter what you're lifting right now at all. You're just working towards that. And like, if you're not a competitive powerlifter and all you're doing is trying to get, as strong as possible and do this just for the pursuit of strength, it shouldn't really matter what you're doing day to day anyway. So it is just a case of pulling back that ego and pulling back that desire to push yourself too hard, and like sort of tuning that in a small bit. I think that sort of segues nicely into what we're going to talk about here today and what the bulk of the conversation is going to be about, which is just a discussion around detraining. And again, Jack, we sort of let you take the lead on this because you've done the sort of research around it. And basically the first thing you wanted to talk about was the mechanisms that surround detraining, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's like pretty much what I wanted to start with was kind of like, what are the actual determinants of strength? Like, we're all powerlifters here, I'd imagine. So like, your main measurement of strength is a 1 rep max. And I just wanted to kind of go into, like, obviously there's psychological factors that go into a 1 rep max, but I just wanted to go into the 3 main physiological factors of strength and of a 1 rep max. And I just kind of wanted to do them in
shit in the bed on comp day and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Like, obviously, like, physiological factors is probably not my area, but that's for someone else to talk about. But like, just from a physiological point of view, like, the first thing that you notice when you go into a gym, probably, if some people mightn't even remember the first time they went into a gym, the first 6 weeks, but you see it with your friends that you bring to the gym, like, their strength increases on a week-to-week basis, and it probably precedes any muscle hypertrophy, any growth. So the reason for that is neural adaptation. So basically what happens is you get more efficient at activating these muscle fibers. So what happens is your motor units are basically, they're what innervates your muscle fibers. So you basically get more efficient at recruiting these together, and they get more synchronized. So it allows you to recruit more of your muscle fibers together, and that basically makes you stronger because they're more synchronized and you can create more force. The same thing as well, another neural adaptation is your agonist-antagonist interaction. So basically what happens is just the simplest example is probably like a bicep curl. So someone who's quite detrained, you might see when they're doing a bicep curl, you might actually get a bit of tricep activity. So that's actually working against the force. So once you get more trained, what happens is you'll have more activity in the bicep and less activity in the tricep. So basically it means there's less force acting against the motion that you're trying to use. So that's basically like the the easiest breakdown of neural adaptations. Like it's what happens in the first kind of six to however many weeks when you start in the gym. And that's kind of, unfortunately, it's probably the thing that will detrain most if you don't train at the moment. So unless you have kind of weights 60, 65, 70% plus of your 1 rep max, the neural adaptations for your squat pattern, for your deadlift pattern, for your bench pattern, they will probably detrain. But studies have shown, and we'll get into them later, that you definitely do gain them back quicker once you have been trained, rather than someone who's new to training. So that's probably all that we're going to go through at the moment for neural adaptation. And the next one is probably the most one that's applicable at the moment. It's muscle size and hypertrophy. And like you can jump in here all you want, because this probably jumps into some of the stuff that you're programming and stuff. So basically, like, I'm sure a lot of you know at this stage that the three main stimuli for muscle hypertrophy are mechanical tension, muscle damage, and metabolic stress. And I'm not going to get into a full explanation of how it occurs or anything. I'm actually going to maybe have an article out later on next week, maybe, just whenever we get a chance to finish it. It's going to have a breakdown of pretty much everything we're talking about. So I think we'd probably try and release that on the CityGym website or something like that. If that's good. So basically, there's a lot of studies that kind of say, like, if all else is equal, that like a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. Like there's a lot of other factors. There's like pronation angles in your muscle, and there's a lot of factors, fiber distribution and stuff like that. But one study that's quite applicable to us, I suppose, is 2010 study. And it was on one of the world championships. I think it was 20 elite male powerlifters. I think 4 of them were world champions. And it basically showed that total body skeletal muscle mass was a strong predictor of powerlifting performance. So it basically means for all of lockdown, if you want to be stronger coming out the other side, you want to at least maintain, if not gain, what muscle you have going into lockdown. So then there's a lot of studies as well, which is kind of, going off what kind of the same principles your program is built on. A lot of them are from Brad Schoenfeld. I don't know if any of you heard of them. He's quite big on YouTube and stuff. So it's kind of 2 of his studies put together. And it basically, like, the first one says that, like, for high reps training, so people who have limited to no equipment, it compared 8 to 12 reps. So there was a group that did 8 to 12 reps, and there was a group that did 25 to 35 reps. And over the intervention, they saw no changes in muscle size between the 2 groups. So basically just kind of, it solidifies the fact that you can do high rep training. So even if you only have small weights, if you only have 5, 10, 20 kilos, if you can only do push-ups, like, I'm sure a lot of people in here can probably, if they do 20, 25, 30 strict push-ups, they'll be very, very close to failure. Like, I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone, but even for me, like, I'm adapting, but if I do tempo push-ups, I'm close to failure in and around the 25 to 35 mark. So you're kind of talking of the same, another study by Schoenfeld is kind of, you're looking to be kind of at about 10 sets plus kind of for trained people. So this is done in untrained, this study was done in untrained people and found the best muscle growth in 10 sets plus per muscle group per week. So like for push-ups here, if you could be talking doing 10 sets plus a push-up is a good starting point per week. So basically, like, it's the same the whole way through. It's kind of saying that anywhere between 40 and 80% of your 1 rep max, you can build the same muscle through. So anywhere between like 8 to 35 reps muscle growth is quite consistent. It can go down as far as 20 with blood flow occlusion training. I don't know if that's something anyone wants to get into. It's not something I know a huge amount about, so it's not something I'd recommend anyone to do, but there is a lot of research out there on it.
Yeah, like, I mean, blood flow restriction training and occlusion training is something that we will be programming over the course of the coming weeks for people, just because, as you were saying, it reduces the amount of load needed to see a significant hypertrophy effect. And obviously then it's just the logistics of basically, for people who don't know blood flow restriction training, when you're doing it for your limbs, you basically have to tie them at sort of the entry to the limbs. So you'd have to tie like the upper arm or like around the of the quad with a tourniquet or something to that effect. But if you're able to implement it, it is a very useful method of training. But yeah, that sort of sentiment in general is something that I don't think people appreciate enough, that you don't necessarily have to be pushing low rep training high to like close to failure to be seeing a significant hypertrophy response, which is why like outside of the strength sport community you don't see a whole pile of it being done, because if you look at, say, so for us, the reason why we push training so close to like single reps, you know, like 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, 8 reps, 10 reps is probably as high as we go, is basically because, as you were saying during at the start, when you're talking about neural adaptations, you're looking for a specificity there. You're looking to push high-end weight to get that neural response. But from a strictly hypertrophy standpoint, it isn't necessary, which is why particularly you see in bodybuilding culture. And again, though, like they are literally the biggest people on the fucking planet. They carry so much muscle mass, is like they, a lot of the times, a lot of their sessions, and particularly as their careers progress and as you see them get older, they tend to do higher and higher rep training, just because it, like, you are still going to see a hypertrophy effect from it, but it just reduces the actual stress on your body. You know, it's much more attainable and you can train it much more frequently. And right now it's going to be a very useful mechanism, is just pushing exertion hard and still training hard just to higher reps and adjusting upwards to keep that hypertrophy there, because it is going to be very achievable for most people with sort of well thought out training and just like a bit of fucking elbow grease to see hypertrophy with exercises that aren't pushing them close to failure at like 6-8 reps, you know, going closer to 15, 20, 30 reps, you can still see a hypertrophy response.
Yeah, but that is probably something that should be mentioned as well, that in all of these studies, that the higher intensity groups, so like the group that trained for the 8 to 12 reps, there was a significantly better strength response from them, but that hypertrophy response was the same. And that's exactly what you'd expect to see. But I suppose that kind of heightens the fact as well that, like, if you can change stuff, so even like for push-ups, if you can get a backpack and put books in it, and you can get closer to that 12 rep range, that just might be better for what you're trying to do. It just might be. So like that's one thing, you know, you can adapt exercises to get down to the rep ranges. If you put like a load of your school books in your bag and you do tempo push-ups, like most people I think are going to be failing somewhere between 8 and 15, depending on your strength level.
Yeah. Like again, the main caveat you're looking for there is when you're at home and when you're trying to make exercise more difficult, have an idea about what muscle groups you're looking to target with an exercise beforehand. If you load up a backpack for push-ups and put it on your hips, you're probably going to fail really early, but it's probably not going to do a whole pile, because the muscle groups that you're looking to overload might necessarily be getting overload. You might just be making the exercise more difficult. So if you're making an exercise more difficult, make sure it's within the parameters of good technique and make sure it's actually pushing exertion in a meaningful way. You know, make sure it's make sure it's just actually making the exercise, it's making it more productive and not just more difficult.
No, definitely. I agree with that, but I just thought it was definitely something that, you know, you have to say for when we are powerlifters. It's just that even though the higher reps are great, if you have no equipment, if you have nothing, but I suppose if you can in any way, maybe that 8 to 12, 8 to 15 range might just be a small bit better for strength. So if you can adapt them anyway, because there is a lot of stuff you can do. There's a lot of exercises that will make them a lot more challenging. And moving swiftly on, like it's the next one. It's just a short point. Steve, you are probably way more qualified to talk about this than me, but it's just movement efficiency.
Qualified. Yeah, go on.
Qualified. Well, yeah. But yeah, like I was just saying, like it's just efficiency of movement. Like you know what, like movement efficiency is kind of hard to define, but you know it when you see it, if that makes sense. You know an efficient lifter. You know when there's no energy leaks, that every bit of force they're generating is going into the bar. In the article, I give I give an example of Damien Nam. Like he just, everything he does is efficient. Alex is an extremely efficient deadlifter. Like if you see Alex on a deadlift bar, like he's nearly standing up before the bar comes off the ground. You know, he's just making the most of it. So I was just saying that there's a lot of exercises like the thoracic extension exercises, the hip mobility, the hip stability exercises that are all in that CityGym program that will just help you be a more efficient lifter. It might get you in a better position off the ground on a sumo deadlift. I know, like, I struggled big time with my hip stability and mobility when I was doing sumo. Just my positioning off the ground just wasn't great. And if you use this time to work on that, you just might be in a better position. If you work on thoracic extension, you might have a bigger arch, you might have a less range of motion when you come back. The trunk stability stuff is great for powerlifting in general. So that's really the last thing that kind of goes into strength, really, that goes into an actual 1 rep max. So they're all kind of things that can be worked on at home.
Yeah, like particularly with I suppose the technical proficiency, right? There are sort of levels to that, and with proficiency specific to our squats, bench, and deadlift, it's going to be quite difficult to work on that because it's a system. Like the lift is a system. You know, like with a bench press, we talk about thoracic extension being super important, right? But thoracic extension is something like thoracic extension basically is being able to like move your upper back, being able to flare it outwards. Everyone can do that. You know, sitting upright right now, every single person can do that more or less. But doing it loaded under a bar in a bench press can be quite difficult for a lot of people. So it's not just the actual act of thoracic extension, it's the application of that into the bench press as a system. But what we're trying to do essentially with that skill work is provide opportunities for people to feel positions that will be useful in your competition lifts. You know, thoracic extension, sort of like rib cage, like keeping your rib cage in neutral for a lot of the lower body skill work that we have put in there, hip stability work. All of these are aspects that are very important in our competition lifts, and where they probably have the most utility is when you're able to do them before you go into your competition lifts in the same session, so that you can feel them and you have a better like proprioception or feeling of how that's meant to be applied within that lift. And unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to do that right now. But what we do have is a chance to apply these principles, get quite good at them to an extent where when we go back into full training, it'll be easier to apply and it'll be easier to come across. And even through using like exercise regressions. So if you're not able to do a competition squat, if you're able to do a front loaded squat, whether it's a Zercher squat or a goblet squat, or, you know, it's like, I don't know, it's a fucking abandoned squat. If you're doing your skill work beforehand and still applying those principles to the lift, yeah, sure, it's not going to be entirely specific to your competition squat, but it will have a utility to a squatting function as a whole. And it will give us the carryover down the line, and it should at very minimum prevent like detraining, like, or slow the detraining of that movement. But for a lot of people, particularly as a whole, there isn't any world champions listening to this fucking YouTube live right now. A lot of people will get a lot of utility, and I'd hazard a guess that a lot of people would actually be able to improve their technique if they apply these principles well, and would be able to see a reasonable enough hypertrophy response if they train hard over this period of time. The neural response is something that is going to be harder to train because, again, we don't have access to weights that are going to stimulate that. They're going to stimulate our nervous system enough. But the other two aspects, like, we're able to create enough mechanical tension to cause like muscle growth, and there are aspects of our technique that we can still improve during this period of time.
Yeah, like that's something that I kind of just want to throw in there as well, that like exercises that aren't exactly specific to your competition exercises will still help. And I was gonna, this is our own published work. It's from our own research now. It's from my FYP, but unfortunately now we got cut off kind of halfway through. We only got 13 subjects through, so it's from a subject of 13, but we had 13 people get through this. So we did 6 weeks training. All they did was twice a week they did they did Bulgarian split squats with a barbell, and they did single leg RDLs. So they did that twice a week for 6 weeks. We pre-tested them, post-tested them, and they went from, I think it was a mean 1RM of somewhere in the low 100s, I think about 101, 102, to about 110 or 111. I think it was a mean increase of about 11.5%. And that was in 6 weeks of, like, it was 6 weeks, twice a week of moderately hard training. It was a quite linear program. Started at sets of 10, down to sets of 8, down to sets of 6, down to sets of 4, down to sets of 2. That's literally what we done for 6 weeks. So like that was,
you had subjects who, so you had subjects who started with roughly a 100 kilo squat.
Yeah,
if that's correct. They had about a 100 kilo squat when they were starting. It was an average.
Yeah.
All you had them do was single leg work. You had them do split squats and RDLs twice a week. Did they do any other training?
Well, we couldn't control for that, but we discouraged against any other lower body training really. Definitely strenuous lower body work was a no for us.
Okay, so these people essentially, they had a 100 kilo squat, did split squats and single leg RDLs twice a week, and over the course of 6 weeks saw a 10 kilo increase on average in their 1RM back squat.
Yeah, no, we had, like, in the session as well, we did dumbbell bench press and 1-arm rows. That was our session. So it was 4 exercises twice a week for 6 weeks.
And geez, that's fucking mental. Because, like, that's not, obviously it's not a 100 kilo back squat isn't going to be super comparable to a powerlifter, but that's not an entirely untrained person either. So there is definitely going to be application to that, and particularly like you're probably not going to see a 10 kilo increase on your comp max just doing split squats twice a week if you're a competitive powerlifter. But that's really encouraging that these people were able to see strength gains just from training non-specific movements to train the same muscle groups over that period.
And as I say, like that's our unpublished work. It's nearly as good as anecdotal work, but it's still a subject size of 13. I was there for all pre-tests, all post tests. So it was still a cool finding.
That's really cool. Like that definitely should give people a lot of optimism, that all isn't lost if you don't have access to like an excess of powerlifting equipment right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And then I suppose to bring it back around to the mechanisms that you talked about, which cause strength gain and which consequently or subsequently cause detraining, neural adaptation, muscle hypertrophy or loss, and technical proficiency. Have you looked into anything to do with, say, timelines in which detraining would occur in these, and what would have to happen for detraining to occur on those areas?
Yeah, well, like there is, like, you've probably all obviously heard of muscle memory. It's such a buzzword. The research on muscle memory is murky enough. Like it's murky enough in trained individuals. There's not a huge body of it out there. Like the leading mechanistic pathway at the moment is still in mice. Like that's what we apply to humans at the moment. That's literally what I'm going off. And basically what that is as you strength train, as you train for hypertrophy, what happens is satellite cells fuse with the muscle fibers and they become myonuclei. So myonuclei is basically the nucleus of your muscle cells. Muscle cell is muscles are one of the only things in the body to have multiple nuclei, one of the only cells to have multiple nuclei. And basically the myonuclei are just the control center of the muscle. So basically they control portions of the muscle, and they're involved in protein synthesis. So basically what happens is when you detrain, so when you actually lose myofibrillar protein or muscle mass, what happens is your muscle gets smaller, but you actually never lose these myonuclei. So once you go back to training, it seems like you have a better potential for protein synthesis within the muscle. So that's why, like, I know I've definitely seen it myself because I've gone through a lot of injuries, as you all know, that I've taken like nearly 6 full weeks off training multiple times, and like I've been back nearly at full strength within kind of anywhere between 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, depending on kind of the severity and the movement. So it does seem like you gain muscle back a lot faster, and that is one of the mechanisms behind it. Greg Nuckols reviewed another paper that was more on the epigenetic side of it. Genetics is something that I don't really feel too comfortable explaining, because it's not wouldn't be my area. It's in this month's edition of Mass, but basically there's changes that happen even on an epigenetic level that aren't related to this mechanism that can be seen for up to 7 weeks. So even for 7 weeks after you finish training, them changes are still there, and it's part of the reason why when you retrain you get a greater response. So there is a lot of studies that kind of say this. No, go on.
And just to clarify, when you talk about after training finishes or detraining, are you talking about like essentially full detraining where an individual doesn't exercise?
Yeah, for most of the studies that I've looked at, detraining is, I've looked at a few in athletes, they're completely off the pitch. They're not complete. There was one in, I think, soccer players or field sports. They didn't do anything to do with that field sport, and they didn't do any gym training. Now, how well these studies are controlled for that, I don't know, because you can't lock people down for 3 to 7 weeks. It's just impossible. But they're the guidelines given, and that's what we have to go off. So like the amount they are detraining to the amount that probably everyone in this chat is detraining are probably completely different. So even though the research that we're looking at is probably quite promising for people who are at home, it's probably even more promising for their situation.
Yeah, for sure. Like there is a big difference between just not being able to get to like a bar and 200 kilos of plates and a few machines and pieces of kit, and fully detraining. There's a massive spectrum in between in terms of what you're able to do and the effect, like the limiting effect that it will have, even if you're not able to get even if you're not able to produce enough training without that equipment to see progress. The amount that you can buffer and reduce that detraining effect is crazy compared to full detraining.
Yeah, like there is a lot of studies that kind of show this, and that one that I said, it's Seaborn et al. It's the one that Greg Nuckols reviewed in Mass. Like even though it was very focused on the epigenetic side of it, the actual performance side of it was really interesting, especially for people who are listening. It's a 21-week study. So what they did is they trained for 7 weeks, they detrained for 7 weeks, and retrained for 7 weeks. So what they found is, obviously they found an increase in the first 7 weeks. So they tested, and then they tested lean mass, and they tested strength. And then they tested after the next 7 weeks of detraining. Obviously there was decreases in 7 weeks. 7 weeks is a long time to detrain. And then they reloaded them. So they retrained them for 7 weeks. And in the lean mass group, there was actually significant increases even from the first 7 weeks of training. So after the full 21 weeks, they were much higher. They were significantly higher than the first 7 weeks of training, even after 7 weeks of detraining, if that makes sense. And it was the same with strength. They weren't significantly higher, than the first 7 weeks phase after 21 weeks, but they were just slightly higher, if not equal.
Solid.
So basically, what it's kind of saying that in this group anyway, that within seven weeks of full detraining, so they basically did nothing for 7 weeks, that they had done like all the damage control and then some. So they'd probably be regained all their strength and all their muscle mass plus some after 7 weeks of retraining.
Mad. Yeah,
so that's probably really one of the biggest ones. That's probably one of the most important ones, because it's the longest. You know, I don't think there's anyone in this who hasn't trained for 7 weeks. I don't think there's anyone here like that. That's the longest one I've seen of actual detraining. So that's pretty interesting. Now the strength changes was done. It was peak isometric force. Like it wasn't a 1 rep max or anything. So I'm not sure would them changes be any different if it was. you would imagine that 7 weeks is a long time to relearn your squat if you're a proficient squatter. But yeah, then going into more research, like it's all quite similar. It says like a lot of the same stuff. So another one, they're kind of working in somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks of detraining is kind of what all the studies look at. So this is one. It's a new study by Gavanda et al. So it's 21 adolescent athletes. They're between 16 and 18. So they do 12 weeks of training, and then they do detrain for 3 weeks. So what they saw a small increase in fat mass. They saw a small decrease in fat-free mass. So they were small. I think they were significant, but they highlighted that it could be a measurement error. So whether it is or it isn't, they were such negligible changes that they're barely worth mentioning. And then there was no significant changes in bench press or back squat 1RM, which is probably, that's 3 weeks of complete detraining. That's like a lot of people are probably because a lot of people are probably at that three week mark. If you've done nothing up until now, you're probably at around that 3 week mark, maybe the 4 week mark.
Yeah.
So that's probably, it's probably good for some people. There's another one that was it's Wang et al. It's the effects of 2 weeks of detraining on 20 trained men. It's the same again. They did 4 weeks training, 2 weeks detraining, 4 weeks retraining. There was no effect on lean mass or fat mass. There was no changes in rectus femoris or quad cross-sectional area. And they actually found, so they trained for 4 weeks and they didn't find a significant increase in strength after that first 4 weeks. But it was nearly like there was a tapering effect, because after the 2 weeks of detraining, there was a significant increase on baseline. So that was an interesting finding. It was nearly like a taper or peak. Yeah. That was an interesting finding. Now, all of them were quite close. So whether the first one was so close to statistical significance, I just don't know. The same again in McMaster et al. It's a review of decay rates of strength training in athletes. So they're all rugby players, American football players. So 27 studies. There was over 1,000 athletes in it. They were quite well trained. Like their 1 rep max was 126 kilos plus or minus 21 kilos. So like they were quite strong. Their 1 rep max back squat was 170.
What lift is this on?
Bench. Sorry, bench. And their 1 rep max back squat was 170 plus or minus 20 kilos. And they concluded that strength can be maintained. Maximal strength can be maintained with no resistance training for up to 3 weeks. And then they said that the effects of detraining will increase after that point. And they said 5 to 16 weeks. So still in what we're finding in the research is that 4th week, there doesn't seem to be any study on the 4th week of detraining in these real training studies. So we're kind of thinking they kind of say up until 3 weeks is where nothing sets in. And then there's another study here.
It's not that they've seen a whole pile of negative results afterwards. It's more that they just haven't lengthened the studies that far to be able to give data on it.
Yeah, they do. That McMaster paper does highlight that from 5 to 6 weeks on, you do start seeing increases in detraining. Yeah. So that's all they have. Okay. There was no studies. Yeah. There was no studies that encompassed that 4th week. It was just left there. And then there's just 2 more studies that are probably of interest. There's one I've actually seen it. I've seen a lot of people putting it around on social media for some reason. It's August Farah et al. 2013, and it's basically I think it compares. Is it 20? I think it's 20 weeks of it's 6 months of continuous training, and then it's 6 months of periodized training. So it's 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And even though there was changes the whole way along, they found that at the end of the 6 months that their bench press 1RM was the same, and that muscle growth was the same. So that even if you take these 3 week breaks off periodically, that at the end of 6 months, you still end up relatively in the same place. There's no significant changes between them. So that's kind of again leading into the kind of
really interesting.
That's again leading into the 3 weeks of now they were untrained. I think their 1 rep max, the mean 1 rep max was in around 50 kilos plus or minus 10 kilos. So whether that would be the same with trained people, I don't know. Studies and trained people can be quite tough to get sometimes because, you know, no one who's training or who's trained wants to give up studies for, you know, they don't want to stop training for anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks. Like,
absolutely.
But yeah, there's just one more study that might be of interest. It's a review. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. It'll be in the article when it comes out. But it's a review of the minimum effective dose for powerlifters. So they included 6 training studies, and they basically found that one set of between 6 to 12 reps, so 70 to 85% of 1RM, to failure per week. So you had to do, it was two to three times per week. So it was one set 2 to 3 times per week, in the 6 to 12, was enough to maintain and even gain some strength, which I just blew my mind. I thought it was a bit mad, but they said that it was only for the squat and the bench that they found it on, and that there wasn't enough data to kind of say that was true for the deadlift.
Okay.
I couldn't in the paper find a mean 1RM, so I don't know how well trained powerlifters they were.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. Yeah.
I don't know that. I could not find a mean. I saw some studies that were kind of saying that they were somewhere between I know they broke down individual studies, and I just didn't get a chance to put a mean on it, but I saw somewhere it's kind of like in around the 140, 150 squat.
Okay.
So, you know, not untrained by any means, but definitely not elite.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is...
if you look at how varied training, if you look at how varied like different training philosophies are within powerlifting, within strength training in general, that sort of does hold up. If you look at, like, say, way less specific programs and the amount of different programs where people don't use a whole pile of training volume or look for a whole pile of training stress. You know, a really common tapering idea that was around years ago for powerlifting competitions was this idea of like a 3-2-1 peak, which was basically you did your last deadlift 3 weeks out, your last squat 2 weeks out, and your last bench 1 week out, and then you were done training. You basically stopped training a month out. And everyone used to fucking do that. And, you know, people are stronger now, but that's probably because the gene pool has gotten bigger. But people used to do just fine doing that before. So you don't have to be following these super high frequency, super high volume training programs to get stronger. Like the amount of people you see who've gotten really strong, like top end athletes, and you look at them and you look at the way they train and you think, right, they just shouldn't be strong with the way they train, but they are. And that's because there's many, many different ways to train. And there's a lot to be said for just doing some hard work.
But yeah, that's pretty much the bulk of the research that's out there. As I said, like the bulk of the actual muscle memory and detraining studies and stuff, a lot of them are done in younger kids and older adults. It's hard enough to find studies in that kind of athletic population between kind of, you know, anywhere between 18 upwards. It can be quite hard to find studies, and as I say, like the mechanistic stuff is like that pathway is still, the leading one is in mice, and that's 10 years old, and there's been nothing to come out to precede it. So
that's mad.
Yeah, but from what you've seen, basically, even if you have done nothing over this lockdown period and you've got into week 3 and are detrained, it's not time to hang up the singlet yet. Like you can still maintain nearly all of your strength and get back into training just fine.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's definitely some of the reason why I wanted to do it, because it is a hard adjustment for a lot of people to make. Like it is, some people just love going to the gym and meeting people, and training is a byproduct of that. So it can be hard for people to find their feet and to train at home. It's like some people might just be so put out by it that they haven't trained at all, and they might starting to feel guilt. And the thing I was saying as well is that, like, up until 3 weeks, we see you don't lose much muscle mass. But as I was saying to you last night, that if your nutrition has changed, your training status has changed. Like I know a lot of people who are only dialed in with their nutrition when they're training hard. So if people have maybe stopped taking their creatine because they're not training, if people have decreased their carb intake because they're not training as much, if they're not as hydrated and they're not training, they're not holding as much glycogen, they're not holding as much water, they are going to look considerably smaller in the mirror. and they're probably going to be a considerable amount lighter on the scales as well, without actually losing any actual muscle mass. So if you're one of the people now who's looking in the mirror being like, I've gotten so much smaller because I haven't trained in 2 weeks, you're probably fine. I think that's a big thing.
Like the percentage of muscle mass that is actually muscle fiber is quite low, isn't it? So those sort of extra things you're talking about, like glycogen and water, you're quite quick to lose those, particularly when you're not looking after your extra factors, your nutrition, hydration, supplementation as well. But on the converse side, they come back just as quick. You do a few sessions, you have 100 grams of carbs before it, you have some sodium, and suddenly you're tanked again. Like,
but that's it. Like, but it can be mad enough for people to look at the mirror and 3 weeks ago they were in CityGym looking at themselves in good lighting. They were just after training, had a big meal beforehand, have been taking their creatine for the last 4 months, full of water, and they think they're a tank. And now 3 weeks later, they're looking in the mirror and they look like they've never lifted a weight. Like that's obviously an extreme, but like that's what can play on people's minds. So, just if you haven't trained for 3 weeks, it's definitely not time to panic. There has been, like I was just saying,
something to bear in mind is.
Go on.
Oh no, I was just going to talk shit. So if you want to
no, I was just going to say, like there is a lot of people who are kind of scaremongering and stuff, like on the internet. Like I've seen people sprout research that are from like immobilized joints. So like how quickly muscle loss occurs when you're in a cast, or how quickly muscle loss occurs when you're fully bedridden, so you can't even get up and walk around, or if you're in a sling. And like they're talking about like that your muscle mass is nearly disappears within a week, and you start getting denervation and stuff like that. And like that stuff just like they'll be the same people who'll try and sell you a muscle building at home plan. It's not real research. It's not, there's nothing behind it.
Because a lot of people, I suppose, in the sort of fitness industry and the training industry right now are panicking because a lot of their income is gone, and people have been forced to panic. So there is a lot of scaremongering going on right now because people want to a lot of people sort of need clients, and they need to sort of it's very easy right now when everyone is in a panic state to sort of scare the masses into feeling like they need to do something. But it just isn't, it doesn't, like it's not as severe as people say it is at all. Like I suppose even if I was to look at myself anecdotally for, I'd say, the bones of a year and a half when I was fucking injured or like just not bother training or whatever. Like the only weights I was lifting was onto other people's bars during PTs for, I'd say, 18 months. And the amount of muscle mass I lost was minimal, after 3 to 4 months of like solid training again, I was essentially back to where I was and a small bit beyond it. If all you do is stay reasonably active right now and look after your nutrition and are sleeping well, you're probably going to mitigate a lot of the detraining effects that people think they are going to have, even if you're not following an overly specific like strength program or anything, but then anything you can do beyond that is going to sort of significantly increase the benefits you see and to make this time more productive. But even if you're not sort of even if you're not like feeling up to like training hard at the minute, because as you're saying, like it's like that adjustment period into training at home can be quite difficult. Just staying active will do a lot to mitigate that. Like in those studies you talked about, like the amount of work that people had to do to maintain strength was quite low. It was surprising in a lot of them.
And I definitely think like that's something that like because a lot of people who are, even myself included, like I'd still see myself as quite untrained. I definitely don't think I'm advanced in any way. And like the people are talking about that this whole thing isn't optimal and we don't have weights and we can't train properly. But like a lot of people who are saying they can't train properly and they're not in optimal conditions. We're sleeping 4 hours a night and then coming in to train, or they
Eating
were
like
coming
shit
straight
all
from,
day.
but they were coming straight from school. They hadn't eaten since 1 o'clock and training at 6. That's not optimal either. Whether you thought it was training in CityGym, you probably thought it was optimal. Trying to squat 3 RMs and 1 RMs, that wasn't optimal either.
Yeah.
So if you can get on top of your sleep, if you can get on top of your nutrition and follow the program that the lads are putting out, you might just put yourself in a better position, because you have nothing else to do, unfortunately, at the moment, than eat, sleep, train, study if you're studying. But unfortunately, there's just nothing else to do.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and like optimal is one of those things that people talk about a lot, and it is situational. What is like fucking optimal right now just depends on what you have access to. So right now, what is optimal isn't just like going into a gym and lifting heavy for most people, because you don't have access to that. Right now it's looking after the extra factors, like keeping your nutrition on point, keeping protein high, looking after supplementation, hydration, to reduce like muscle loss, and just looking after whatever training you can. And not worrying about that, and not worrying about the grass being greener on the other side, because this mightn't be as far away from what you were doing as you think it was. You probably weren't as people probably were, things weren't as like perfect before as it's easy to seem like. There's probably a case of romanticism about that, so before everyone was very busy, probably just reduce the recovery capacity that people had. Bearing that in mind, it's probably
no, definitely. I just think if there was ever a time to start ingraining good habits, it's now, when you've all the time in the world. Like I think it was Jack Cooney started tracking calories for the first time ever.
Wow.
Like that's fucking class.
Yeah.
But this is the time for it. Like that extra
100%.
half an hour a day it takes to track your food. You have that time now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need 3 hours at night to be on your phone to see what you've missed during the day, because you haven't missed anything during the day, so you can just you can sleep.
That's it.
It now is the time, if there was ever one, to make good habits, and just try and make the most of the situation.
Yeah, especially with the whole like you were saying about the whole nutrition side of things as well, because I think just in like my own experience, in terms of like when I actually got my nutrition in check, I don't think I was like actually prepping for anything or anything like that, but I've never, like, even in terms of like, if you're feeling really low right now in terms of all this this quarantine and all that kind of stuff, like just getting your nutrition in check, like literally do it for like 4 or 5 weeks. You'd be surprised how like much better you feel in general, let alone like in terms of training and all that kind of stuff. So that's something I really do recommend to everyone listening. Like, even if you if you're not on top of it, try whatever you can to get on top of it,
Definitely.
Like eating one meal a day and only drinking fizzy drinks or cans, and staying up until 5 a.m. probably isn't the most productive strategy for feeling good, particularly when the world is just really shit in general. Doing something to try and bring a ray of sunshine there is going to be useful. We have a listener question for you, Jack, from Robert Maloney. Hi lads, love the show, long time listener, first time caller, you flirt. Jack, have you come across any research involving motor imagery in regards to health keeping gains?
It's something that I have definitely come across, but I am not overly comfortable. I remember we've done it in lectures, and I remember it's a lot to do with the neural pathways as well. I remember, I think there was one study that one of our lecturers is actually involved in, and it was to do with visualization. I think it was in golf, and it was basically saying that like the same areas of the brain that are activated when you're actually playing the sport are activated when you're using imagery. So it's not something that I've really delved into. But I definitely think it's something that should be looked into, and it's something that I actually might even look into for next week or the week after, if that's something that like it's probably not long enough to do a full episode on, definitely for me or my knowledge of it. But I definitely think it's something that can be useful now, especially when you've time. Like even if it helps 1%, isn't it worth however long of the day you put into it? But yeah, that's all that I'd really be comfortable to say about it at the moment. I know there is definitely research on it. I just don't know the bulk of it. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Maloney.
Greg Knuckles has a really good article on his website, Stronger by Science. It's from a couple of years ago, to do with mental imagery and the impact it can have on strength gains. It's a really interesting one that if you want to look up, would be quite useful. I'm not going to butcher it by trying to fucking paraphrase it right now, but if you want to read on the topic, it is definitely very good. And one area that mental imagery can be very useful for in sort of an inverse way, won't necessarily, I don't know about the exact benefits of it for helping keeping gains right now, but imagery is a really useful tool for performance environments, both in terms of like technique, consistency. You know, the better you are at mental imagery, probably the more consistent your technique is going to be. The better you can visualize a squat and visualize the cues that surround it, for example, the more likely you probably are to be able to do it under a bar. Like when it comes to the different stages of motor learning, the better you are at mental imagery, and the better I've found people to be at mental imagery, again, anecdotal, the more proficient I've found them at getting to higher stages of which one of you's clicking? Something. But what's it called? Yeah, the better someone is at mental imagery, the better I felt. Like the more advanced stages of motor learning they seem to be able to get to, they be able to become more automatic. Like if you're able to accurately visualize a squat before you do it, for example, you're probably going to have to do less thinking about the technique and the sort of demands of a squat when you're actually doing it, and allow yourself to just perform better. And it can also just be very useful in terms of regulating nerves, stay in a high pressure environment like a competition. I know it's something that you found benefit with yourself, Alex, when it came to competitions, wasn't it? Mental imagery in terms of controlling competition day nerves.
Yeah, 100%, man. Like that was, I was literally just gonna say that there. Like, I remember when we used to talk, when you used to say it to me before, I used to always, back in the days, like I was like, go away with that shit, like, you know, and then when we kind of actually brought it into to training for, well, especially for comp day, like the difference obviously was ridiculous, you know, because everything just went so well. You know, I went from going from like, you know, on a good day still going 5 for 9, whereas like now it's like, you know, you're going 8 for 9, 9 for 9 kind of thing in the comp, because of that whole mental preparation, let's say, you know, thinking it through kind of. It's a lot more, it feels a lot more fluid lifting as well.
Yeah, like it's something that probably needs to be used, you know, be like not to be used to an overextent, because like with some people, what happens with their mental imagery is they get so encompassed in their mental imagery that it's nearly paralysis by analysis. So what should be an automatic, what should be second nature, like a squat, suddenly feels like all these different moving parts that you need to try and piece together in your head. Mm-hmm. So basically, when you should have a clear mind when you're executing the squat. So that second before you go down, your mind should be clear, and you shouldn't be thinking about all these different components. You know, you should be nearly as one. You shouldn't be thinking my knees need to do this, my hips need to do this. It should be quite an autonomic movement, if that makes any sense.
100%.
Yeah, like that's one of the big sort of prerequisites of sort of effectively implementing it, is how you're envisaging what you're doing. Like if all you're doing, say with mental imagery for a pressure situation, is imagining yourself succeeding and like doing all these amazing things and imagining best case scenarios, and that's all you're preparing yourself for, that can be quite counterproductive, which is where you see a lot of the positivity and fucking you know, like warrior mentalities fall apart instantly in a competition days when people haven't prepared themselves for adversity, you know, because just in general shit hits the fan in real life. So if you're not prepared for that, and if you haven't prepared for that, you're probably selling yourself short. And if you're yeah, and again, if you're thinking of like a squat and you're not imagining it, and you're not able to effectively imagine yourself executing the movement as a whole, and you're just thinking of specific areas, like you're thinking of, you struggle with knee cave, and all you're thinking about is keeping your knees out. A lift is a system again, so there's plenty of things happening. You have to be imagining it as a whole and effectively visualizing it. And yeah, this is probably an area that is outside of our scope, so it's something that we can either look into more or bring someone on to talk about, because it is definitely a big area and something that is very useful.
I was just going to say to Rob that like I know I do have research in it somewhere, and I do have slides on it somewhere, and if I find them I will definitely send them on to him. I just want to say that as well. And Kaz said tops off.
A month into quarantine is not a time where you want to see me with so we'll give it a small bit more time, but request is noted. So we'll keep that in mind as we get back into training. Maybe. We'll keep that for the private OnlyFans. I think that sort of nicely wraps up everything we had to talk about, unless you had any more areas of research or anything else you had wanted to bring up.
No, like I've pretty much gone through all the research that I've found and that I think is interesting and good quality, and that I think there's actually takeaways from. And that's not just repeating itself. I wasn't going to do a meta-analysis on all the studies. I was going to go off the most recent and the best at the moment. Hopefully we will put some sort of an article together that kind of summarizes probably a bit better than I did speaking. Hopefully
we got through quite a lot there,
Jesus.
Yeah. And your article is more or less done, so it's just a case of finishing up small bits of it, and it's just a case of finishing up small bits of it, and we'll be able to put that into the member side as well.
Yeah, well, the article was done on my study break, so it probably needs a very good proofread because my brain wasn't working.
Fair.
Yeah, I'd offer to do that, but I'm not able to read, so we'll get someone else to proofread that.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, I think that is more or less everything. And yeah, so thanks for listening, guys. And yeah, if you have any questions from this, there is the question submission form on the member site, and you can also just send it to one of us and we'll get back to you. And yeah, then our content for next week, we will be uploading in the next few days what the schedule is, and if you have anything you want us to talk about, just let us know, and we'll see you all soon.
Gert.
Boom.
Gert. So great, see you later, fuckers.